Hello, I'm Robyn, and you're listening to Protagonists, a podcast for leaders and managers of the video games industry. Today, I'm going to talk to you about burnout. What is the problem? Why should you care? And what can you do to prevent it? Don't forget, I'm not a medical professional, so if you're suffering from mental health issues, please seek a professional from the right industry to help you. One of the first things you have to realize, good intentions are not enough. You really have to understand why burnout occurs to find a way to solve it. Do you know that in the 22 years I've been working in the industry, never once I had a training to help me deal with employees that have burnout or struggling with burnout? Training leaders and managers is really not something our industry is good at. But it's really bad because we're actually losing a lot of talents due to this issue. You see, the average tenure in the industry I read a few years ago in the United States is about 4 years. 4 years until people just get out of the industry and move on to something else. So much knowledge and experience are lost this way. When an individual is struggling, we've been told to listen to the individual, ask them to work less, make HR happy by tracking what's going on, and usually that's it. That's what you need to do to get your ass covered. And this is obviously not enough because the problem is not solved. Here's a slightly better way to do it. When you see someone struggling, of course, first listen to the problem. Find out what their inner motivations. Why are they struggling? Is it workload? Is it their own motivations? Their own drives? Review their priorities, right? You have to discuss and align with your team members. Reassure them that the quality of work they're doing is fine. You have to understand the context in which they're operating in so you can do the proper changes. You can give them some time off. You can reevaluate priorities. You can help them manage stakeholders. If some work cannot be done in time, that's all right. They will have to say to people to wait. You can also lower expectations of quality because doing something at 90% might take you an hour, but doing it at 95% quality might take you 6. So that's a big difference. Maybe just 90% is acceptable for that specific task. If not, prioritize accordingly. You also can distribute tasks, delay tasks, and cancel tasks for your team members. As a manager, whatever your level, you have a huge influence on what gets done. And this is also about you managing the expectations of the older stakeholders in the organization. If your team cannot deliver within the appropriate time because it's unrealistic, you shouldn't burn out your team for that. And that's your responsibility. It doesn't matter if you're junior manager, senior manager, wherever you are in the organization, it is your responsibility to buffer your team to make sure that they don't get too much work, so much work that they can't handle it. So why should you care about all of this, right? Because, well, first it's your job, right? As a people manager, it's your job to take care of your people. Also, as a human being, you need to have empathy. You need to take pride in how you're caring for your team. That's a very strong value you need to have. And if you're ambitious, well, caring for your people is the best way to achieve your ambitions because a strong team will help you grow. And believe me, your best achievers, the ones that are supporting your success, will be the first one to leave the organization through burnout because they're going to be so committed to help you. And that means they're the ones that are going to be burning out first. And if you are insecure yourself, you have to understand that if your team has your back, the organization will respect you as a leader. Let's talk about this from the point of view of a company or you if you're a CEO or a C-level executive. When people burn out and they need to take sabbaticals, what you will notice is that these usually are your best achievers. You will notice that the first people impacted are your top achievers because they're the ones working the hardest. And it's up to you to manage them and make sure they work less if you want to keep them, because their recovery will take years. And that's going to be very expensive for you. They'll be making more mistakes and the productivity will be impacted. So that's why you need to pace basically your best resources. If the morale of your team is impacted, you'll see more and more people doing the silent quitting technique. As a company, you need to do prevention. because fixing burnout is much harder than prevention. Once it seeps in, you're going to be in trouble because you won't be able to be behind every manager, every decisions to make sure that people are correcting course. And then you'll have to it will take you a lot of time to train people and making sure that the culture gets better. That might take years as well. And this means years of productivity impacted. All right, let's talk about the burnout and the triggers. You see, most of the time people say burnout comes from workload. That's true. Workload plays an important role in burnout. But it's not only this, it's the amount of pressure people get to deliver. In some environments, the pressure is so intense that that's just enough. So pressure and intensity can play a role in burnout. But as well, unfair treatment and harassment are really important for that as well. Because if your colleagues are not treating you well, if your manager is not treating you well, if you don't feel safe at work, that's enough to have you burn out. And that's not related to work. If it's compounded by work, it's even worse. But you see, that's another factor. Lack of communication. People are just being in a bubble. They don't know what's going on. People don't tell them what's going on. They're afraid to see changes. They're not having the information they need to process, and they feel powerless. That's enough for some people to burn out. Confusing work responsibilities is also another one. There's the concept of dealing with ambiguity, right? That's a catch-all term that allows companies to put a lot of things into this. So, about confusing work responsibilities. If people don't know what they're expected to do, right? You might have heard about RACI, being responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Very few companies actually have a clear idea of what they expect the different people involved in a project or in their day-to-day operations needs to do, meaning that the individuals need to fend for themselves. And this constant elbowing and trying to make themselves relevant are very frustrating, and also can cause a lot of friction. And if they're not strong enough or assertive enough, they might be completely destroyed by this confusing situation. But generally speaking, people just want to feel safe at work and be able to bring their best self and just focusing on the best work they can do ever. And strangely enough, in most organizations, it's really hard to do the best job ever, not because you don't want it, but because the factors, the environment, and other elements makes it very hard for you to be the best contributor. So what can you do to improve the situation? People have different needs, right? So understanding the type of people that are in your team, what do they expect, what do they need to do their best work, is definitely part of your role as a people manager. You have to understand their behaviors, because if you understand how people work, how they think, you will understand why they behave in certain ways, and you can help correct that. You can also understand the triggers. Some environments, some situations will be more triggering for some of your team members than others. That's something you can look into. So, of course, in your career, at times you're going to be working in toxic environments. It's pretty common in the video games industry today. And you're working today to change that. However, today, as a people manager, it is part of your role to create a safe space for your own team. That's a role you can play. It doesn't matter if the company is toxic. A good people manager should be able to create a safe environment for their own people. That's what you should be striving for. Pressure comes in different shape and form in an organization, and that's up to you to manage the pressure your team gets. That's the shielding aspect of the people manager. And it's up to you to not be the one putting too much pressure. It's up to you to be the one regulating the pressure from the outside. So think yourself as a pressure valve for your own team. You have to make sure that people don't get too much pressure, and sometimes they do need pressure to work a bit harder. But it's up to you to find out what is the right level of pressure that your team can sustain. Communication is another different factor. Some people will burn out if they don't have the right information or they feel isolated. You, as a people manager, can make sure that the right people get the information at the right time. It's up to you to proactively look for the information that your team needs to feel informed and knowing what's going to happen to a level that they feel comfortable with. If your team members feel lost because they don't know something, you can tell them, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And you should go there and find out. Ask your own manager, Ask your managers, keep asking and find out for your own team. You need to be a champion. You need to understand what's going on. Different companies have different cultures. I'm not talking about being toxic or not. By helping your own team members understand the company culture, you can make their life easier. They will know what to expect. Usually burnout comes from not knowing what to prioritize, what is really important. If you understand the company culture, you will understand what matters. And your team members need to understand what matters in their work and what is expected from them. The other point is you have to understand the individual culture. By understanding where people come from and finding out what are the right tools for the right people will definitely help you manage your team members' expectations and better manage them. I think you can also ask yourself what type of leadership style your team is responsive to. As a good leader, you need to be able to master different type of leadership styles and adapt based on the situation you're in. So you see, all of these elements, right, combined, they're all very interconnected, but by understanding each of these and how they play with one another will give you some keys and information on how to better handle the situation. But generally speaking, the general advice would be talk to your people regularly, find out what they need, how they think, how they tick, what do they need to be happy, and making sure that you're here to take care of them. That's the role of a great people manager. You know, burnout is not something instant. It comes in phases. And I would say there are 4 major phases. The first one is about when you see your team members or your team getting overinvested. They're working super hard. They exhaust themselves in their task, right? And this is the first sign, right? They get really into it. They get really passionate. They're really working hard. And people usually like that because it looks good. You know, there's great results being done and people are really into what they're doing. But if you don't slow your team down at the right point of time, you'll be running in phase 2 of the symptoms. Phase 2 is composed in 2 key elements, frustration and abrasion. First is your team will be frustrated because they can't do all the work they should be doing. They're really engaged with the process, they want to achieve the best, but for whatever reason, things are getting difficult. They're struggling to achieve what they're trying to do. At that point, they're going to slightly move to abrasion, meaning that they're going to challenge and become more cynical because they want to do things and they feel that the organization is fighting them for trying to solve the issues. This is a very common problem, right? So the team is very engaged. They want to do a shitload of things. They want to do it right. They want to do it fast. And they feel that the company is resisting. The thing is, their passion is going to hit that wall and it's going to be starting to be very abrasive because they don't understand why they're being slowed down. They're trying to do the best thing for the company. And the company, or actually some individuals, might be very frustrated by this behavior, and that will create a lot of internal friction, internal challenges, internal conflicts. And this is where things start to get really tricky because some people might get even fired at that point. Or usually there's 2 things that will happen. Either people will start to quit or getting fired, or the performance will start to drop. They will go into withdrawal, right? They won't be engaging that much. They won't care anymore. They'll become very cynical. And eventually, they will also move into this step of silent quitting, going to sabbatical, resign, or go on medical leave, right? So it's because all this energy they have expended trying to push an invisible wall. And obviously, that huge passion they've put into the project, the company, the organizations getting results has not paid off. And they're being very frustrated about it. And on top of that, the company is not grateful. They're actually in trouble in the organization. They have created enemies, challenges, friction, a lot of things, and often they have to quit. And usually it's really hard to move on from that situation because you feel in that situation you have done the best job possible and the company didn't recognize it. So let's try to identify people that are at risk of burnout. For me, there are 3 major buckets. So the first is the workaholic type. There are entire books that could be written, and most likely have been written about workaholics and why they're working so hard and so long and being so dedicated. They have psychological traits that makes them work a lot. Then there are people that are slow. And that might be because they're struggling, because it takes them more time to accomplish a task, or they get more distracted. Anyway, whatever the reasons, they need more time to do the same level of work than the others. so they tend to work more to compensate. The second bucket are the anxious and the perfectionists. They both really care about quality of their work, but for different reasons. The anxious will be more on the, I want to make the team, my colleagues, my boss happy. My work needs to be good because I'm afraid I'm going to be fired, or I'm afraid that people will not respect me. The perfectionist type has a bit of a similar pattern, but it's more about pride. They want to be proud of the work they're doing. They take a lot of pride in what they're doing, right? It's ego-driven, right? They want to achieve the best work, and that's why they're doing all the hours and the effort. And the third bucket are maybe something that are usually people don't really talk about, but it's more the empathic type and the lazy type. The empathic type is the person that will get burned out by association. If that individual is in a team that is struggling with burnout, overworked, and other issues, even if his personal situation is okay, it will be impacted by empathy, right? It will feel for the other people in the team. They're very receptive and sensitive to the overall environment. Many people are like that, and they even sometimes don't realize it, but they are really affected by the overall mood of the company, the organization, the overall toxicity, and other things. The lazy type is a very different story. They're afraid when they see the other people struggling, and they might be afraid that they have to work more to compensate. Just the amount of work that other people are doing make them tired because they are feeling that people are working hard, and by association, they're working hard as well. I know it's funny, but that's true. I've noticed it myself. Some people don't do much, but because they're in a hardworking team, they're feeling a lot of pressure on their work that they're doing themselves, even if their workload is minimal. So you see, all of this is not about being told by a boss they need to do a great job, right? Those three different buckets are really about different motivations that the individual have about what they're doing. So you see these three different buckets of individuals, right? They are trying to do their best. They're trying to cope with an environment, and they're getting something out of work that is very precious to them. Anyway, so you as a manager need to understand what is driving your top performers, what is driving the people, and making sure that they don't fall into those categories. And obviously, there's a reason of burnout because there's just too much work to be done. Of course, that also exists, and it's usually compounded by the different behaviors and how the people are. There are some companies in the industry that are known to be toxic. But interestingly enough, a lot of companies today, they say they're going to be different, that they don't want to be toxic, and that happiness is pretty much mandatory. This is very dangerous because hidden behind all those good intentions, there's a big risk, which is that the company will become conflict avoidant. And that could be even more toxic. I'm going to give you an example of how this can play out. Imagine you're a manager in this type of organization. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and you're also struggling to keep your work-life balance. And then you're working on the weekends. But you're not allowed to work on the weekends because you're in a healthy company and that's against the culture. So you can't say you're working on the weekends, but you are. So you're pretending that you need to. So when people ask you on Monday, what have you done this weekend? You have to lie. You can't say you actually have worked the whole weekend to make the deadline, because that would be set up a bad example for the other employees. People don't want to know you've been working on the weekends because that's by a bad vibe. That's very dangerous, right? Because it's even worse than the toxic companies that makes you work hard. If a company that makes you work hard and also wants you to pretend that everything is fine and you have a perfect work-life balance, that's really toxic. And I've seen that happen. So you have to understand that shaming managers for working hard is not the way. Shaming managers because their team are working hard is not the way. Shaming is not the way. The question is understanding what is triggering certain type of behaviors. And for that, you need to sit down, really understand, talk, discuss, align, and really create a really healthy organization when you can have safe conflicts. A safe space is not a place where there's no complaint, there's no challenges, right? A safe place is a place where you can actually speak up and not being punished for it. So if you want to know if there's toxicity somewhere, don't listen to what people say. Watch what they do. What does the company do when people are working too much? Watch what your employees do, not what they say. If they say everything is fine and they're working the weekend and look exhausted, then there's a problem. And you shouldn't be blaming them. You should try to open a dialogue to find out what's the root cause of the issue. Generally speaking, we're talking about building trust here, right? So if you want to be a good people manager, you need to earn the trust of your team in a way that they can freely talk about the challenges that they have. And that's not easy, right? You need to build that trust. It takes months, and you have to make sure that you are worthy of that trust as well. It is your responsibility to create a safe environment where your team can speak up about their challenges, their struggle, and what's going wrong. You can be demanding with your team, but you should also demand that they open up their mouth when you're asking too much out of them. And that's trust being built. People should be able to push back when they feel that you're asking too much out of them. One of the other plague that's been in our industry, in management in general, a lot of people think that they should say yes to their manager. Like whatever you ask them, they will say yes. This is a terrible advice. Don't do that. You should never be a yes person, because saying yes is the worst way you can do things. You can ask questions, you can do other things, but stop being a yes person. You have to really also making sure you understand the requirements of what needs to happen. I used to say to people, learn how to say no, right? When people ask you too much. Now I say, learn how to say when. If people ask you the impossible, you just need to ask by when they want it. And then you negotiate with them to see when it's going to be possible. If you have time to do 3 tasks this week or this month or whatever, you tell them that's the 2 slots you have. And you negotiate with them, and if they want more, you explain to them that will have to be done the next month. If not, they need to give you more resources. That's the rule. And then the last advice, maybe one of the most important one. Remember, as a people manager, you're the boss. You actually are the boss of your own team. You're the boss maybe of your own craft. You're the one that knows what can be done, within what time frame, with what people, and if you're set up for success. Your mission, your goal, your mandate is actually to speak up if you're being given an unrealistic mandate, because you're shielding your team. You need to give them enough room to work and some kind of buffer so they can work it in good conditions. It is up to you to create a safe environment in a way that people won't, in a safe environment where people will not burn out. And that's why you being a strong leader is very important. If you keep saying yes to your boss all the time, you're making yourself a disfavor and you're hurting your own team. So be a strong leader, define what can be done, do it, and when people ask you the impossible, just say when. So this is the end of this podcast episode. I hope you liked it, and I'm looking forward to get your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and join our Discord. Thank you. This was Robyn for Protagonists.